topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. And with so many things happening around the world today, it's important to kind of think about how can we build those empathetic connections with people, and that's what we are going to be talking about. Welcome, our wonderful guest, Dr. Chantal Lorio.
Good morning, Divya. How are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So tell me if you recall a moment from your childhood or youth when a positive mark happened for you, like whether it was a person or a moment.
No, I think my grandmother was, I was very close with her. And growing up, she used to come visit us every weekend. We lived like an hour away, and she would stay in my room, and we would just talk all night. And she was really a strong influence on me because she was a very strong woman. I think we learned so much from my grandparents. She lived through the Depression. She quit school so that she could help raise her other 6 siblings. Um, just amazing. And when I think about the hard times that I've gone through, I always think about what she went through and what she was able to accomplish in her life. And I think that always, I carry it with me everywhere.
Yeah, that's powerful. So you had a very strong role model as you were growing up.
Yeah.
And as you grew up, did you have any other influences that influenced the choice of career you made?
Yeah, my uncle. My uncle was a podiatrist as well. I really struggled with what I wanted to do. Um, Specifically, I wanted to know. I knew I wanted something with the sciences, and I watched how he cared for the elderly, and he was just so gentle, and he meant so much to his patients. So I spent some time with him in his office, and it was that connection that I saw him making with the patients. And there was something about podiatry that you actually do a lot of talking while you're doing your work, and I really liked that. And I think that was probably what solidified for me that was the specific field I wanted to go into.
Mm. So then did you go into podiatry?
I did. So I
Love
was a podiatrist for 30 years. And toward the last 10 of those years, I started focusing on coaching other physicians of all specialties in their communication style. I did a lot of training, and I had a lot of coaching myself to help teach me how to do that. And that just became the thing that got me up in the morning, wanting to work with other physicians and help them make those connections with their patients.
Mm. And so many times what happens is that when we are talking about the corporate world, we think about the big organizations, and yet we kind of tend to overlook the whole health sector. It's hospitals over there. So many times people, especially ER, whether it's emergency room or whether it is any hospitals, they're already under so much pressure. I mean, our healthcare workers go through so much. And yet for them, it may be the next patient, but for the patient, regardless wherever they are, especially with the physical or any other ailments they're coming in with, there is that whole mental aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So especially with the busy healthcare professionals and doctors, what is the first thing that you would say that they need to keep in mind?
So I think we have to just acknowledge the fact that there is a limited time. We're not going to get more time with our patients than what we feel we need. It's always going to be less than what we think. So we have to make that period of time, we have to focus on connection before we do anything else. And I say that very seriously because if a patient doesn't trust you, then everything else you tell them may not be worth anything to them. So you have to focus that time on building trust. And what I do is I teach how to do it very quickly because you only have that small period of time. So teaching all healthcare professionals, not just physicians, I work with many healthcare professionals. I teach them how to make those moments count, work on that and initially, work on building trust immediately in your language and in your nonverbal gestures, and then focus on the medical piece because now you've built some trust with them.
So how, let's say, and this can be applicable to any person.
That's correct. And yes, it's one
Yes.
of the things that I've learned, especially in writing my book. I learned that more people were interested in this than just those in healthcare. And it's about how do you make a connection using your language. And the most powerful way to make connections is through intentional empathy. And what I mean by that is really taking their perspective and try to acknowledge whatever emotion you see happening or you can assume is happening. And I say assume because it's okay to acknowledge that you don't necessarily know what's going on, but it seems like, or it sounds like. And so that's the kind of language that I recommend. So, for example, let's say you had, tell me a complaint that you have, Divya, any complaint at all.
Okay. So one complaint, let's say if your kind of complaint is that so many times, you're walking down the street, it's not even a complaint, it's more of an observation. People may not smile back, or people
Yeah.
are so busy in their own lives. Or another thing that I've seen, not only with clients, but within the family itself, that people are on the phones together and not
Mhm.
interacting as much.
I'm sure that's very disheartening for you, somebody who really feels strongly about those greetings and those connections with people.
Well, no, I believe to meet people where they're at. And
Yes.
the whole idea is that you to each his own, and it's important to have that empathy and understanding that they may be busy or occupied in something else.
Yeah. So you're able to look beyond what you see.
Hmm.
Emotional intelligence, right? You're able to look
Yeah.
beyond what you see. And when someone tells me something's going on with them, I try to understand what's going on with them. So I will say, it sounds like you're going through this. And then I wait and have them tell me what's really going on, which you just did. So I said that must be disheartening for you. But then you said, well, actually, and then you showed me your emotional intelligence. So you kind of course corrected that for me. But because I made that gesture to say it sounds like that's what's going on with you, I'm connecting with you. I'm trying to know what's
Hmm.
going on with you. And so even if I'm wrong, which I was wrong, it wasn't disheartening for you. Or maybe it was, a little bit right. Either way, it's that trying to do that that creates the connection as opposed to I understand. If you just tell someone I understand, it's kind of an assumption and people tend to say, no, you really don't, especially if they're upset about something. We always want to say, I understand, I understand. That doesn't work very well with people because they get a little put out that you are assuming their emotions. So I try to say it sounds like, or it must be, and at least that person knows that I'm trying to connect with them and know what's going on with them.
Mm. So, what about situations where people are just kind of meeting each other for the first time? How can you go ahead and develop that connection? Because you're not always going to be in a position where you're just kind of like, being there as a coach or consultant or as a leader,
Mhm.
checking in with the other person. It could be in a different setting. So, what would be that first step?
Exactly, and I always say in healthcare, we have an advantage because people are coming in with a complaint no matter what, right? When they first come in, we always have something we can focus on empathizing with. But remembering those nonverbal gestures. Dale Carnegie talked about these years back in the 1930s, making eye contact, therapeutic touch. We call it in healthcare, we call it therapeutic touch. Knowing that sometimes a hand on the shoulder or shaking a hand, we do that for a reason, because that creates a physical connection. And that, of course, also creates, it works with your language and the nonverbal and the verbal connections together. Saying a really important thing, and again, this was a Dale Carnegie thing, was saying people's names back to them. If you're trying to create a connection, people love to hear their names. It says you care enough about me to say my name. And for those of you who have been in the situation where you've forgotten someone's name, it is so awkward when you forget someone's name, because you recognize that the awkwardness because you're not able to connect as much because you're not saying the name. So you say, hey. When someone just says hey to you, you're just not feeling it. It's kind of like when you say when you walk on the street or you tell someone hello. I remember in school, we used to, when we were changing classes, we were all seeing all of our, the people that we, whether it was friends or acquaintances, we see all the other students, and some would say, hey, but some would say, hi, Chantal. And it was different. It was different when someone said your name because they knew it, number one, and number two, they cared enough to say it and make that little bit of a connection. So those are just the basics of making eye contact, a little therapeutic touch, and saying someone's name back to them. When you first are introduced to someone, when they say their name to you, say it immediately back to them. So, hi Chantal. This is Jerry. Hi, Jerry. Nice to meet you. Saying the name back to them, because it's anything you can do in that first few seconds matters.
So what you're saying is, and that is so true, because sometimes you walk in a room and nobody has done anything to you. You look around, you take a look, and you see someone, and you either like, oh, that person is so wonderful, and they have done nothing. And then it could be their body posture, their body language, and there could be someone you're like, you just don't like them, or it's like there's something about them that puts you off.
Yeah.
So tell us about the body senses also that you talk about.
Yeah. So, and you're right. Some people just have that. And we notice that with physicians too. Some of them just have it. They could spend 3 minutes with the patient and their patients love them. And others could sit in there for 40 minutes and they don't have that same connection. So there really are techniques that they're using, whether they're aware of them and doing them intentionally, or if they're just natural. There are techniques that matter. So some of the other things are, number one, sitting down versus standing up. And it depends on the social situation. But for example, you notice in podcasts, we're sitting down. When I give a lecture, I stand up. But if I'm wanting to talk to you and make a connection, sitting down says I have time for you. And so we bring that up to our physicians too. Patients think that you're in a rush when you're standing up. So just that alone, sitting down matters. Leaning in versus leaning out. And there are times when it's appropriate to do either one. Now you think about that. When you lean back a little bit, it kind of says, again, I have time. I'm relaxed. When you're really leaning in, when someone's telling you something that they're really upset about or they're emotional, leaning in says, I really care and I'm here to help you. So you're making, as you're doing these things, it's not like one is good or bad, but they send a message. So think about what message I'm sending. Probably one of the most important techniques I tell people to pay attention to is their arms and their hands. Because if you sit like this, the closed off, it sends a strong message, a very negative, strong message. It says, I really don't have time for you. I don't care. I'm smarter than you. There's a whole lot of things people can pick up from this, whether you mean to or not. This may be comfortable. I actually worked with a physician that had his patient experience scores were very low, and no one could figure out why. They called me because they said, he's a really nice guy. And we can't figure out what's going on, why are his scores so low. And I went in there and I said, if I close my eyes and listen to you, it's a beautiful conversation. Your communication is beautiful. But you're standing like this the entire time. And so his patients felt very put out by that. And that was the only difference that we made to help them with this connection. So just being aware of your body language, having an open body language rather than a closed off body language. The other thing is, and this is something I learned from an attorney many years ago who helped train me for doing expert witnesses, is keeping your hands away from your mouth. So even like this or this, we do that, but actually that could show people that you're hiding something. If you do that, if you talk to body language experts, they say that this can mean that you might be hiding something, you're not being truthful. So little things like that can matter. But again, hands and mouth, just remember, think kind of open, an open stance.
Now, since we are talking about that, that's in person. But even medicine and, of course, so much organization, even though we are going back to hybrid, they're still on Zoom since post-pandemic. So what would you say are some Zoom etiquettes?
So Zoom etiquettes. Number one is paying attention to where your camera is. And it's difficult because the closer you are to the camera, the more you can see. So right now I'm looking at you. You can see I'm not looking at the camera. When I'm further away, it's a little bit easier because there's a, it blends when you're further away. So it's not as bad. But focusing on putting the person you're talking to up toward the camera really makes a difference. And then remembering that when you're on Zoom and you're talking to someone, you can connect with them equally without the empathic gestures, but your language is that much more important because you can't do touch, you can't do shaking of hands. You only have your language. So you really have to focus on making sure you make empathic connections with people when you're just virtual, because you don't have that. You lose a lot of the ability to do that, to make those nonverbal gestures.
So when you talk about the bubble, tell us a bit more about that.
The bubble, and I talk about this in my book. It's that when you read the comic strips, if you read them now or you remember reading them as a child, remember how there's the regular circle, and then there's the one that has little bubbles underneath. Okay, and the little bubbles underneath it are what's in the back of their mind, right? Their thoughts. So I call that the bubble. The thing that's going on behind the scenes that you don't necessarily hear in language. And so understanding what that thing is, the thing behind the thing is what we call it in coaching. I don't know if you've heard that expression, the thing behind the thing, getting people to be aware of what's really going on, what's behind that. And that's so in order to show empathy for someone, you really have to listen and use all your senses to understand. Sometimes reading their facial expressions, hearing little words that they say, when they repeat themselves, when someone says something more than once, they're telling you what's in their bubble. It's because maybe you missed it the first time, and now they want to make sure that you know what's really going on with them. So I have several examples in my book of how that happens, but I'll give one example of what finding the bubble. You have to find the bubble. So for example, someone comes in and says, I'm really distraught because this happened. Well, then they've just told you what their bubble is. That's easy. But then there's others that'll say something like, for example, well, I hurt my foot because I'm moving. I'm in the process of moving. And so, I stumbled, whatever, and it happened. This thing happened. And then you start going on and asking them questions about the injury. And then they say again, well, I really can't stay off my foot because, I'm moving. Now, this is the bubble. This is what you're missing. Why do they mention that twice? There's something they want you to know. So turns out their whole life is turned upside down because they're in the process of moving right now. That's an important thing to talk with someone about. Even though they're here for something, for a foot injury, whatever it might be, that's the thing that they really need to let you know exactly, this is what's going on in my life right now. Now we can talk about this other thing. So listening for those little cues, and one of them is repeating themselves, or saying it, they repeat it, it's a little louder, giving details. People don't say things for no reason, like, oh, we just came back from a trip because my son graduated from Harvard with honors. And then you move on and say, oh, okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're back. No, they want you to know that their son just graduated from Harvard with honors. So to say something like, you must be so proud, is acknowledging that emotion of pride. They didn't say that for no reason. It wasn't about them coming back from the trip. They wanted you to know something they were proud about.
Mm. Mm. And then, well, that is very true. Looking for the iceberg, right? That what they say in the iceberg theory, that what
Right.
appears on the surface is way different,
Yes.
and it is hiding behind it. There's usually like a meaning or underlying cause or something like that.
Mhm.
So, given that, especially what happens in the professional area, so far, we have been conditioned about hiding our emotions. So, a lot of times, people ask, like, okay, you're talking about being transparent, being authentic. So, where do you draw the line about, like, where you're sharing emotions and where you bring that balance to it?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I have a whole chapter on hiding our emotions because that's kind of what we were taught professionally, at least in my field, we're taught to hide our emotions, right? At least when things are really rough and you don't want to judge people, and that's fair. You really don't. I mean, people are telling you some really some things you might judge them for, but we're taught not to do that. We have to be very even keel, and that's why when someone tells us something that they're upset about, if we maintain that hiding our emotions, we can come across as sterile. I mean, we can come across as we just don't care, and that's not the case. It's just a matter of teaching people when, like you said, when how do you draw that line? And so that's why I kind of teach those empathic responses rather than you don't necessarily have to cry when someone cries, but acknowledging what they're going through and saying this must be very difficult for you. Or I can tell what this is doing to you. I can tell this is really upsetting you, that kind of thing. It doesn't mean that you have to carry those emotions with you. There's something that in medicine they call compassion fatigue. Turns
Mhm.
out that that's a fallacy, that it really isn't compassion fatigue. And we found through the literature is that when you show compassion, you actually fill your cup too. When you take a minute to connect to someone, guess what happens? You fill your own cup. So it's okay to do that. It's okay to extend yourself a little bit. It doesn't mean you have to absorb the emotion, but you can certainly acknowledge it and share that moment with the person. And that brings me to another point about compassion and empathy. Um, I spend a lot of time teaching people to be empathic because it's not our default. And I don't just mean physicians. I mean as people, it is not our default. When people tell us something that's going on with them, about 80% of the time we respond with what's going on with ourselves. Oh
Mm.
yeah, I know, I've been through that, whatever. Um, and what happens in medicine is we tend to respond with fixing. And so if you're in an industry where you fix people, if you're in, let's say you're a plumber and you're going to fix things, whatever it might be, where you're one who gives advice, you help, then your initial response is going to be, well, let me see, I can do something about that. You
Mm.
can really miss opportunities to make connections when you do that. And
Mhm.
this is where I've worked the most with physicians on is before you get to that, let me fix you, show empathy. And fixing is compassion. It's a good
Mhm.
thing. You want to fix them, you want to help them. But before you do that, make that empathic connection. And let me give you an
Mm.
example of that. Let's say you were to tell me I was up all night in pain with my neck. Well, let's say you did like this. I was okay. You get the face, you get the hands. I was up all night in pain with my neck. That's my bubble, right? I'm miserable.
Mhm.
And most physicians will respond with, well, give me a number on a scale of 1 to 10. Is it sharp or dull? Does it radiate down your arm? Tell me more about the pain. And that's fine because they're being compassionate. They're working it up so they can then help the person diagnose and treat. But before they do that, if they say, you must be exhausted. Yeah,
Mhm.
doc, I really am. Well, tell me more about that pain. How bad is it on a scale of 1 to 10? So I just have them insert one moment of connection.
Mhm.
And I tell them you can when you've connected with someone, there's actually a response you will see, and it's fairly distinctive when you made a connection. So if I say you must be miserable, and you go, yeah, doc, I really am. It's sort of a little head tilt and an affirmation, like a yeah. When you see that, I always tell people pause after you an empathic response because you want to pause and see the connection. You wait, you see them do that. That's how you know you connected. They made that little
Mm,
moment. They kind of tilt their head,
right, right.
like you get me.
Yeah. Now you talked about sounds like. That was one of the phrases you mentioned that, it's a good one to use rather than I understand. Are there any other phrases that people can use?
Must be. It must be difficult for you. Um,
Hmm.
must be
So
seems
must
like, sounds like, and must be.
so must usually has a negative connotation. People don't. So tell me a little bit more about that in depth.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of these things, you have to think of them contextually, right?
Hmm.
Depending on the situation. Like you must be so proud, that kind of thing. Or
Yeah.
that must be very disheartening. Like I told you, that must be very disheartening. And again, I was wrong, and that happens. So you're taking a little bit of a, a chance by doing it, but it's okay because the person understands that you were just trying to know what's going through, and then they can kind of correct you. I'll tell you what I do tell people to be careful about though is don't underestimate someone's misery. And what do you mean by that? I would tell them always go to the superlative and don't underestimate. So what do I mean by that? Um,
Hmm.
if someone, so for example, we use scales, pain scale, was it a scale of 1 to
Right.
10? They tell
Most
you,
of the doctor's offices nowadays, I go, like,
yeah,
you don't even see the doctor. Like, usually you have the assistant kind of come in and they go through the whole process and they're saying, like, okay, if you have a pain, here's the chart. And then they give you like all the smiley faces. Like, I've got
yeah.
this one doctor that I go to, from like angry face to like crunch face. Like, they'll kind of show you and tell you, like, where do you fall on that scale?
And it's funny because everybody's different, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
my 8 might be someone else's 3, who
Right,
knows?
right, right.
Those are more for really to compare to last time, right? Is it any better
Yeah.
this time? But if someone says my pain is a 6, I'm not going to say, oh, it sounds like you're a little uncomfortable
Hmm.
because there's a good chance they're going to say, no, I'm miserable. So I always say, sounds miserable. Okay.
Mm,
And it's
mhm,
okay for them to say, well, actually, I'm pretty tough. Then you haven't
mm,
insulted them or minimized their misery. See
mhm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So no matter what, I always say go to the approach. So if I tell you I haven't eaten since yesterday, you don't want to say you must be a little hungry. You say,
Mhm.
oh, you must be starving. You must be famished. Or, you want to really go to the superlative. Or I haven't slept all night. You must be exhausted.
Yeah.
Not you must be a little tired. You know what I mean? So making sure that that when you're doing when you're trying to guess what someone's going with, always kind of go to the superlative in most cases, so that you don't insult them.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, that at the end of the day, it kind of comes in, what you're sharing are techniques, and then people have to use their own emotional intelligence to see like what's appropriate in the given moment
Correct.
contextually.
Correct. Um, I tell you, I always give homework when I give when I give lectures or I give trainings with physicians, and I
Hmm.
tell them their homework is to, at the end of the day, if they live with someone or even if they want to just make a phone call to a friend, but when they come home, ask them about their day because a lot of us are guilty of this. And when they tell you about their struggles, instead of trying to fix them, which is what our default is, well, you shouldn't let people talk to you like that. Or next time, this is what you should do. We want to give them all the should haves. But to just say, I'm sorry, that must be really frustrating, huh? And look for the little head tilt in the air and watch the connection that you've made with them and the difference that it feels when
Hmm.
you listen to them and you acknowledge what they're going through. It's all the difference in the world in a
Hmm.
relationship. And trust is at the heart of every relationship. So making those connections to build trust really does matter, no matter what the relationship, whether it's doctor patient, spousal relationship, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And trust, as you mentioned, that is at the core of anything, because without trust, and trust is so fragile that once it breaks, it's just kind of hard to rebuild. It's always going to be lined with a layer of mistrust somewhere. So that's a good point. It's a good segue. What happens, let's say you have a fragmented relationship? How do you build that trust back?
So first you have to figure out what builds trust. So everyone's a little bit different with what
Mm,
builds trust. We have our own history. We have our own background. So if you were damaged early on in life for a specific reason, someone cheated on you, whatever that might be, then that's probably going to be the thing that they look for, that person's going to look for trust, whether it's building trust or not trusting someone. It's going to be related to that. So understanding what it is that breaks relationships for that person, understand what builds relationships for that person is very important. And we've talked with large groups of people. I'll go around the room and say, "What for you builds trust?" And you would be amazed at the number of different answers that I get. Most of the time, it's they do what they say they're going to do.
yeah,
So for that person, you want to make sure that you always do what you say you're going to do, and don't make promises that you know or you're not sure you can keep. Make sure if I say this, I've got to do it because that's what builds trust for that person. So
right,
kind of figuring out what it is. For some people, it's transparency. It's making sure you open up to that person because they don't trust anyone that doesn't open up to them. That kind of thing. So I don't think that it's I don't think that's out of line in most cases to ask people what for you builds trust. And if it's someone that you've broken their trust, I would talk more about that with them.
yeah,
What was it about that broke your trust? And what else for you builds trust? Because I want to earn it back. And have a really long conversation about what do I need to do.
yeah. And it is like you said, what is it that I can do? You're not blaming the other person. You are not putting them under any pressure. What you're sharing is that you're coming with that intentional. Goes back to when we talked about intentional empathy. So it's also like intentional trust building.
Yeah.
So as we talk about this, would you say, like, when somebody is going out there to build that empathy connection, do you have any steps that people can immediately apply as they're listening to this?
Yeah, I think start with the nonverbal. Start with making
Mhm.
eye contact and saying their name. And I do think that touch is important. Of course, we always have to be careful um, who, what, when, where, why, and how we touch because it can be misconstrued. So we're always careful about that. But in a professional and that using your judgment on that on how to touch. But I think it's very important that we keep that in mind. That builds a connection for people. Maybe sometimes
Mhm.
just a hand on the shoulder, whatever's a safe place to touch. Um, and then look for a way to show empathy. So we kind of talked about, I was saying that in healthcare, we have easy because people are coming in with a complaint. But you'd be surprised at how you can connect with someone over little things. I had a hard time uh, finding a place to park because I had to go up three levels. Oh, how frustrating, huh? Just something like that. Um, Look for that opportunity. Find out their bubble, which very often they just come out and say. Sometimes you have to read their faces. Sometimes you have to read their emotions or their mannerisms, and then look for opportunities to do that because that matters. That builds that connection. Helping them doesn't necessarily do that, believe it or not. It's a different kind of relationship. So again, with in healthcare, we're helpers, right? We're going to fix things for people. It tends to have an upward relationship. I look up to you because you took care of me,
Mm,
and that's okay. That's a good relationship. You take care of me. But I'll trust you to take care of me. But if I want to trust you as a person, as a friend, as a colleague, as just person to person, you really need to do the empathy. You need to look for something, an emotion that they're feeling. I'll tell you the most positive way to do it without even saying it must be is to read their face.
mm,
You
yes.
look quite happy today. You look very pleasant today. Divya, it's great to see you. You look very pleasant today. Um, that you can see the reaction in someone's face once you read their face.
Mhm.
And again, you can be wrong, and that's okay. As long as you don't say you look like a grump today, But 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 you can say it looks like something's bothering you, or it
Yeah,
looks like you're struggling today. You're okay.
yeah,
Um, and people really appreciate that you took the time to look at those subtleties of their face to make that connection.
yeah. And what you're driving at is that don't go for absolutes. Sounds like. So there's always a very clear demarcation in there that you're not assuming. You're not making any definitive statements. You're
That's right.
just kind of being curious and checking in. So that's very powerful. So if you were to share one thing with our listeners and with our audience that they could implement straight away, what might that be?
I would say the homework that I mentioned, if you try that once with the person at home and you
Mhm.
see the reaction that you get, then start looking for opportunities to use that throughout your day.
Mm,
Use that in your conversations to connect with everybody, even in an elevator talking with someone, and watch their reaction. Saying things like, "Oh, it looks like you're having a good day today." Just
mhm,
because you see them smiling, you're happy, and watch the reaction that people give you. And you'll see that it does make a difference, not only for them, but for you. Remember, when you connect with someone else, you kind of fill your own cup. And, that's a good thing that you feel that connection both ways. Again, a whole chapter on that feeling it both ways,
mm,
what it does for you. And one of the things from a medical standpoint, I talk about when we were in Hurricane Katrina and we were all scattered across the state and other states. I felt that while patients were in fear for missing their doctor, as a physician, I felt this emptiness of my patients. I couldn't get to my patients. I didn't know
mm.
what's going on with my patients. It is a two-way street. Those relationships are two-way street. So when we're talking about making these attempts to connect with people, it's not just something for them. It's something for your relationship for both of you.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to have a couple of doctors in my life, that I've been seeing for like, gosh, 13, 14 years and have such a good relationship that usually, even though I might be in pain or something, I look forward to seeing them. And then that talks about the connection. So tell us some more about your book and tell us how people can connect with you and
Sure,
anything else you'd like to share.
sure. So I started this work when I was working at Oxford Health System um, back in 2018, 20, yeah, something like that. Um, uh, I worked there for 12 years and I became their medical director of patient experience. And so I
Hmm.
worked with physicians doing this kind of work. Um, and so I was discovering all these little things, I have a whole lot more tips in there too. I have in my top 10 um, golden rules of empathy, and a lot of little things, some of the things we've talked about. But all those were derived from that work that I did for 10 years, watching that relationship with the physician and the patient and coaching them, giving them feedback. And like I said, afterwards, I realized that this was something that we could be doing at home and other people were interested in too. So I decided to publish the book on it. Um, and I've been working on it just very slowly over a course of like 4 years. Just when things would come to mind, I would put it down. And so I finally said, I'm going to put it all together. I got an editor and put it in into print. And you can get it at Amazon now. It's available on Amazon. I also have a website. My book, so let me just really clarify too. It's called I Get You, I Got You. And the difference there, I get you is what we've been talking about, empathy. I get you. I got you. Remember I said that different relationship, the compassion, it's helping someone. I got you. I'm taking care of you. And it's a little bit different. It's a good relationship. But if you skip the I get you don't make the connection. So that's why I put it in there. I get you. I got you. The secret to creating an empathic connection with every patient every time. But it's a very easy read. Anyone, even out of healthcare, will enjoy it. And they've told me that they really enjoy reading it, even though they're not in healthcare.
Mm,
I do have a website. It's my full name without spaces, drchantallorio.com.
mm.
Um, and yeah, oh, I see. You have it scrolling there. Thank you very much. So yeah, you can. That has a link to the Amazon site to buy it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chantal, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. And the way I experience things is, it's so beautiful to have these conversations because I'm learning while I'm sharing the wisdom of so many years that you bring with our audience. So
Yeah.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
And
Divya. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it very much.
absolutely. And thank you, wonderful audience, because without you, the show would not be possible. And I want to wish you a very happy new year and want to leave you with one thing to keep in mind. Remember, you don't want just destination goals. You want goals that are approachable and that leave room for failure. So definitely reach out to us. Let us know how we can support you in 2026 to make it your best year ever yet. And thank you, Juan, a tech genius, for making the show possible. Be well and take care.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.